Hey guys, so earlier I showed another turn 3 OTK on Morgana, but what if you want an updated clear using modern units that doesn't rely on an OTK? So let's go back for a newer clear that still is a 5-man clear, that way you can cycle units for the unit mission, but we're going to go through the thresholds and deal with them using newer units. So we're going to be using our best tank, Abigail, because she's really good for tanking, she gears easily, and she has fire support. We're going to use Melissa for killers, morale gain, etc. Just an overall good support. Kaito because he's the best debuffer. And then we're going to use Esther and Cleom for our damage dealers. So we're going to go through the thresholds and deal with them with this party. Not really a budget run or anything. We are using good gear, but I figured I'd show you if you can't quite pull off the OTK, let's do a slower clear, although it's still not going to be that slow. Okay, during the ambush, the boss puts up an Omni Imperil to every element by 150, but with Abigail, as you can see, even with the big Imperil active, we've geared her to still be completely immune to everything without even using a buff. This way, when she dies later in the fight and re-raises and comes back, she's still going to be covering, and she'll still be immune to everything. She dies unavoidably from the nightmare attack. She's also full evasion, too, which is pretty nice. Okay, so Abigail on turn 1 is going to go ahead and put up cover. We'll use contingency to start filling the morale gauge. And then we're going to use Infrarega to imbue the party with fire. Melissa is going to put up shared immunity to make us immune to everything. Chronic flow for the morale gain. And then human killer to just fill the morale gauge and do, a killer. Kaito is going to just deep and destabilizing to break and fill the morale gauge. Esther is going to energizing, bolting, and calm to fill the morale gauge. And Cleom is, we're going to go ahead and use most of her Magnuses on turn 1, because after turn 1, we're not going to spend time setting up with buffs. We're going to just deal damage, 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 damage. We're never going to stop to use buffs with our DPS units. So we're just going to get rid of them on turn 1. So we're going to Prodigious, Sharp, and Blood Red, because some of those fill the morale gauge, which is the main reason we're doing that. Okay, so here's some attacks. We're provoking with Kaito, and because we're going to be using an LB, the boss is going to start using Death, so make sure your provoker is Death immune. Now, as far as the magic goes, we're covering it with Abigail, no big deal. Kaito's evading the physical, typical stuff. Okay, wait for all this to finish. Now we're going to start dealing a little bit of damage. So Kaito is going to downpour for the Fairy Killer, and then just put up breaks again. The boss cures her debuffs every single turn, so you got to keep reapplying all the debuffs with a unit. Kaito's really good at that. We're going to use Abigail this turn just to anti-magic and physical, because it fills the morale gauge and it puts up breaks, etc. Melissa, now we're going to do Bard Darkja for a 200 dark resist buff, because as you get lower in the fight, the boss starts using cover ignoring darkness damage. That's going to make us immune. We're going to use Minutes of Might for the stat buff, LB buff, etc. And then we'll just Human Killer again. We'll do it on Esther this time. We just did it on Cleom. Okay, now we're going to deal some damage with an LB. Because we're using LBs, the boss is going to get an Undispellable defense buff, which is going to hurt Esther's damage, but it's fine. We're going to deal with it. Kaito can remove it, but I'll talk more about that in a second. So here's some, some damage, etc. No big deal. We're covering it. We didn't push the first threshold yet, so nothing's going to change yet. I think the first threshold is either at 80, 70, or 60. I don't remember, and it doesn't even matter. I don't care. The only ones that really matters is the 50 and 20 threshold, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. Okay, this turn, because the morale gauge is above 150 at this point, Kaito can now start doing his good breaks with Deadly and Natural. That's going to put up Omni Imperil, Omni Weapon Imperil, and the 90 Defensive Spirit Break. And then we'll just refresh Torrential Downpour for the killer. Let's have Abigail go ahead and just, fill the morale gauge again, basically, just, anti-physical and magical. Let's have Melissa do, on this turn, we're going to just do a bunch of killers, including Human Killer on Cleome. Make sure I did it right. So Human Killer on Cleome, and then just more killers just to fill the morale gauge. Doesn't really matter on who. And now I'm going to go ahead and push the threshold. Now, because we are using 200 Dark Resist buff, even though we're still Omni Imperiled, we are still immune to darkness on everyone. Because now the boss is going to start using cover ignoring darkness damage. So Magnus and double bolting with you. Cleome will do triple bolting, which fills her LB gauge, and chain it up. So we've pushed the boss below either, 80, 70, one of them. She's going to start using things like Innervating Curse, which bypasses cover, and then Vicious Massacre, which is AoE non-elemental physical. Now, for the darkness damage, there's the Innervation. For the darkness damage, we're immune to it. If she does, there's the Massacre. We're evading the entire party for the physical damage. It's a little tricky to gear the whole party in full evasion, and you can use Mirage instead. But if you can gear the party in full evasion, it's certainly a lot easier than having to worry about keeping Mirage active the entire fight. So we're just evading everyone to ignore the Vicious Massacre. Okay. Let's deal some damage. Now, we're going to use Melissa to use her SLB on herself. That's going to reduce the cooldown of her stat buff and LB buff because, as I've talked about before, she can't maintain it otherwise. So that's also going to re-raise the party, which is going to re-raise the tank, who is going to die on this threshold. Now, let's have Kaito go ahead and... Now, we could use Unpredictable Tide to Magnus away the boss's defense buff, and that would cause Esther to deal a lot more damage this turn. But as I found out in a test run a moment ago, if I do that, we push too far. We want to burst the boss under 50 without going all the way to 20%. At 20%, the boss will do a second nightmare and your tank will die twice. That would be a bad thing. So we're gonna just leave the defense buff there to intentionally lower Esther's damage. So Abigail's gonna die this turn. So let's just go ahead and end Farega to re-imbue the party, and then we'll just, anti-magic and physical to fill the morale gauge. Kaito will refresh the Fairy Killer, and then just Deadly and Natural. And let's do some LB now. So we're going to push the boss below 50, and that's going to get our Abigail killed from the Nightmare. Then she's going to re-raise and continue to cover. Okay, we almost pushed below 20 even with the defense buff up, but we're good. Okay, so here we go. So here's some attacks, and then at some point during this turn, the boss is going to Nightmare. There's the Nightmare. It kills our Abigail, but then she comes back and continues to cover. Because even after the boss is still going, we're still immune. And this is what I'm talking about. Even with no buffs at all, Abigail is still immune to everything while she re-raises and covers, and it keeps the party alive during that turn. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and go to the next phase again. The next threshold is at 20%. So let's have Abigail reapply cover. Let's go ahead and... what are we doing real quick? Honestly, nothing else really matters. So we'll just, physical and magic, who cares? So Melissa, and by the way, if the mana drain drained too much of your mana, you can use the morale bar and just refill your mana with the morale bar. There you go. It's always active, so just refill your mana every turn. Kaito can go ahead and just do, let's see, Torrential, Deadly, and Natural. Get that out of the way. And then Melissa is going to do... We need to re-raise again. So we're going to go ahead and Parasol Shield to re-raise. Let's Human Killer on Cleome. And then let's go ahead and Minutes of Might again for the stat buff. And then Esther can just Calm and double bolting. And Cleome can triple Gallant and chain it up. Now, I guess this technically might even kill the boss. It's unfortunate. Unfortunate we killed the boss too quickly. I didn't actually want to kill the boss that quick because I wanted to show the next threshold. Well, anyway, the 20% threshold would have been the same thing as the 50. The boss would have done a bunch of attacks, then the boss would have done Nightmare, and it would have killed your tank, but the tank would have re-raised because of Melissa. And then we would have just killed the boss the next turn. So, whatever. So here it is. So the whole fight... the boss basically had a defense buff, a really big defense buff, so that very heavily nerfed Esther's damage. But Cleome is a magical damage dealer, therefore she ignores that. So that was the breakdown. So there we go. You could also use a double Cleome if you've got a friend, and probably kill the boss, on turn 3, completely honest. But there it is. So there was, oh, let me show you the gear and all. So we'll go over here to the easy versions to show the gear. So the gear on Kaito is full evasion. He's passive provoking, by the way. I kind of went overboard on resist. You don't need that much resist, but you do need 250 to darkness after a buff. So 50 dark resist is all you really need because we're doing a buff. Passive provoke, evasion, and death immunity. So there we go. Also stop immunity. He needs stop immunity as well. Abigail is immune to everything after an imperil, so she has 250 to everything. Technically speaking, you don't need this much, because we are using a 70 resist all buff from Melissa, but just for safety, I geared her all the way. Full evasion, and other than that, kind of whatever. But again, all you really need is 180 to all, because we're using a 70 resist all buff. So there we go. Melissa is using some dark resist, full evasion, just for support, and a morale card. So dual wielding a morale card. Esther is using 50 or better dark resist. That's all that matters. And she is full evasion. So 100 evasion, maxed LB damage, maxed human killer, and 125 fairy. A little low on the fairy killer, because going heavy evasion does hurt your killers, obviously. But there we go. And then a killer card. And then Lunar Festival Cleome is using, again, full evasion, maxed LB damage, maxed human, and 100 fairy killer. So there we go. And there's the setup we're using. And again, we killed quicker than I would have liked for the video. So if your gear isn't as good, it's totally fine. The only thing is keep re-raise on your tank. And don't double push the threshold. Don't go from above 50 to below 20 in a single turn, because that'll get your tank killed twice, and then your tank will start the turn dead, and you'll have a bad day. So just don't double jump a threshold unless you're OTKing the boss at that point. Anyway, there was an updated clear that goes through the thresholds. Okay, see you in a bit.